and tricks for startups or SaaS companies of all sizes. My good friend and longtime colleague, Graham Matthews, is going to be the traffic cop, and he's got some questions he wants to ask. These sessions are super helpful if you guys ask questions. So when I teach classes at university, I have a prize that I give out for the best questions. But given that we're no longer in university, I did not bring a prize because I'm assuming you're going to sort of be self-motivated here. So ask away. Great.
So good morning, everybody. As I mentioned to some of you, I don't operate well without caffeine. So the good news is I've got some in front of me, but it's still working its way through. So bear with me. It's a little hit and miss. We're going to be talking about some accounting stuff. We'll try and make that as unpainful and unboring as possible, but it is accounting. All due respect back there. I'm a CA too, so I poke fun of myself. And sales. So usually sales are important for survival among other things.
Not as smart, but yeah.
So just a quick show of hands here, so I got a sense of where to steer the conversation. How many folks here are SaaS companies with revenues less than $1 million? And SaaS companies a little bit bigger than that. That's almost everybody. That's great. So Dave here is with Salesforce. I'm sure everybody's heard of Salesforce. When you're first starting out, obviously, keeping track of things like leads and hopefully having somebody buy your product and use it is all cool stuff. But as soon as you've got more than one customer, you get tracked. And what can you tell us, Dave, about what companies like Salesforce, and obviously Salesforce in particular, can bring to the table in terms of what do you do with this sales thing?
Yeah. So I guess just as an intro first, so Dave Borelli, I've been with Salesforce about 10 years. Prior to that, I was at a different software company for a few years called Trapeze Group, which is a CSI company or Constellation Software. And before that, I was out of the industry. I was in insurance, actually. My role at Salesforce, I lead our commercial business. So we segment based on employee count. And so the commercial business is essentially any company in Canada between 150 and about 5,000 or 10,000 employees, and we sub-segment a couple ways underneath that. We segment based on employee count because essentially that's our addressable market. We can theoretically sell a license to any employee in any company. And so I've got teams in Vancouver, Montreal, which we built up a few years ago. So the question was, what can we be by, I guess?
Yeah. How do you start addressing this thing? Or maybe that's the employee count's place to start. Like, what's too small? Or when's too late? When should folks be thinking about talking to yourself?
So I have a counterpart that runs our SMB business for Canada, and so we have teams of people that cover what we consider our small business space, which is businesses in Canada between 1 and 45 employees. So there really is no customer too small for us. We've got dedicated support for small business. And the logic there is that a lot of small businesses, we like to call them temporarily small business. And so a lot of those ones will grow, and the logic is that we'll grow. We haven't really automated on the low end all that much. It's still very human, even if we're a startup.
And so for the folks who might not be as familiar, 60 seconds or less, what is Salesforce?
Yeah, so Salesforce is a customer relationship management company. The way I'd summarize it is we help businesses find, win, keep, and grow customers. So we've got marketing automation tools, sales management tools, customer service tools on the back end, customer community tools to provide self-service. So that in a nutshell is sort of what we do. I've heard our CEO say when he started the company 19 years ago, he started just with core Salesforce automation or core CRM, essentially electronic content management. And he did that with the logic of, I know I'm going to eventually, or I want to eventually be in marketing, customer service, and become a platform that's used for any app. But he knew that doing that online in the cloud 20 years ago probably wouldn't have flown. So we started with something people were familiar with because the Siebels of the world had already sort of trained the market on that. And now we've expanded. So similar, he compares it to the way Amazon started with just books, because if you were going to buy things online, you probably needed to start with something the same, whether you bought it online or. Whereas the logic for Amazon was always to grow into.
So if I'm running my little SaaS business, rarely little SaaS business, and I got 8 million things to do and very much time to do it. How do I look at this tool? Is this something where I gotta go find a sales guy or a marketing lady or vice versa and say, go use the Salesforce thing, and then out of sight, out of mind? Is it something that everybody in the company's got to use to be effective? How do you actually use these types of tools in a way that actually do what they're supposed to do? Because it sounds great, but does it actually deliver anything?
So I think the question, I'd equate that to an adoption question, because I'd be lying if I told you that some customers don't buy Salesforce and then it just goes stale. Nobody uses it and it's good money after bad. And so I think the golden rule number one is it starts at the top, and it starts with the executives using it or the founders using it if you want all your employees to use it. Our CEO is really active on our own instance or our own version of Salesforce. And I think the employees are going to mimic the commitment of the executives. It's as plain and simple as that. Of course, you need a proper implementation, and so on the low end, they can be pretty simple, and you don't necessarily need to pay for all sorts of services. Just get started, do a little bit of an import of data, and you're good to go. But if it is a little bit of a larger and more complex implementation, I'd always suggest getting a little bit of help so it gets done properly, because if it's not a useful tool, no one's going to adopt it.
So if I'm going by where the said they were, let's say I'm doing $500,000 in revenue.
Yeah.
And now I realize I need some tools to keep me on top of leads and so forth. What kind of price point am I looking at, and how long does it take to actually get this thing up and running? Is this a year exercise? Is this like a 2-day exercise? Like what do I have to have on my radar screen when
it could be as simple or as I know it's kind of a crappy answer, but it can be as simple or as complex as you'd like it to be. If it's really just, hey, I need something to manage the leads that I've got, it could be $20 a user a month spend and no implementation costs, right? It could be something as simple as that. If you've got tons of integration systems, if you've got a lot of data that needs to be cleansed and migrated, then it can then you can get up to the thousands, tens of thousands for implementation because of the user count.
So Dave, a lot of these implementations fail because of the lack of training. And obviously with a big company like Salesforce, it's kind of tough to train the temporarily small companies. What are you guys doing about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. We how many of you are customers of Salesforce? And for those who are, even if you haven't, have you heard of Trailhead? You know what Trailhead is? So we've created this online learning management system, and we use it internally, like any learning management tool you would have for your employees to train on different products or whatever it is. But we've actually also put Trailhead into the public domain, whether you're a customer or whether you're not a customer. So the interesting thing is, if you use Trailhead, anybody can go on it. There are certifications, there's things you can do to learn how to use the tools. So if you're a customer, you can get trained, you can have your people go on it and get trained, and you can actually see the certifications they've done. And what's more interesting is that we actually offer Trailhead on how Salesforce runs its business. So if you're interested in, hey, how does Salesforce lead sales teams? How does Salesforce do its online marketing? How does Salesforce develop its comp plans? We actually have Trailhead sessions on that, so you can actually figure out how we run our business. We really do open up the kimono. It's actually quite interesting.
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah. So there's a question there.
Yeah. So last time I inquired as to using Salesforce, it was kind of like a dual sale where the initial was, first and let me. Is that still the model you guys use? And as a software company yourself, this idea of partnering and implementers and being able to manage implementers.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to what that experience is like.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's it. So it's a good question. We're not too much into the services game, so this is a good story behind it. When I started the company, we used to sell our own implementation services. So if you bought Salesforce 10, 12 years ago, you probably would have had a little bit of a different experience because we wouldn't have sicked you on a third-party implementer. We actually had those services internally, and when I started as a rep, I was getting compensated on selling services just like I would on product. But it was probably 6 or 8 months after I started, our CEO came out and just said, we're getting out of the services game. We obviously retained some resources for some of our Fortune 5s that just demanded one throat to choke, but for the most part, the logic there was we're now going to build, nurture, create a third-party network of implementation partners. PwC being one example on the high end, but we've got a ton of 5, 10, 30, 40 person shops. The reason why we made that decision as a company was because we wanted to put all of our resources, all of our funding into the product. We didn't want to be a services company. And so, we sort of saw this exponential growth just because it allowed us to manage a 3-release cycle and really best of breed. But as we've grown, and it's funny, this came up yesterday, because as we've grown, our product set's gotten a little bit more complex. We've acquired a few companies, and as we've tried to integrate those into our platform, it's put a lot of strain on our implementation network because they haven't kept up with the pace of change. And it has led to some challenging deployments for us and some customer satisfaction issues. So over the last year or two, we've started, having our own implementation services again. It's not something we really push. We don't, as reps, we don't even get compensated on it anymore. But it's something that we sometimes need depending on the complexity of the project. So that was more just a function of how our product set's grown.
That's a nice polite way of saying there was some incentive to charge more for more services than maybe some of the small companies need.
No, you know what? It's still not really like if you listen to an investor, it's not even really a huge revenue stream. Here we go.
So that probably is a reasonable segue to the introduction I should have done. So other than being somebody that Andrew knows, which is a great starting point, of course, one of the other things I do is I'm CFO of a SaaS company called iotum. I don't know where the name came from originally. I'll have to come up with a better answer than that, but that's the truthful answer. But we're in the group collaboration space. So we provide a range of conferencing and other meeting solutions ranging from old 1-800 conferencing services through online video streaming and podcasting, cards, and for a bunch of different brand names which aren't iotum. And we are a Salesforce customer, but we also are in a world where that's great in terms of prospecting and dealing with sales, but we also need to generate those leads, and we also need to deal with our existing customers where there are other related products that all have to work together in terms of marketing, drip campaign, all that kind of stuff. But how does Salesforce operate in that world, and what types of, can you handle all those things in the Salesforce universe, or does Salesforce have to work with a whole pile of other products that you need to be aware of as a company?
There are a lot of things that we can do. I'd say as a golden rule, we're not an ERP, right? So if you have an accounting system in the back end, we'll kind of surround the accounting system and we'll tie into it. But that's pretty much what we're not. Everything that surrounds that, whether it's sales automation, is obviously table stakes for us. Marketing automation, customer service. We've got quoting tools that obviously really latch onto an accounting system. But that's the way I would look at it. You could look at your accounting system as sort of the center, and then all the surrounding apps are things that.
And how does Salesforce fit the SaaS environment? So historically, I date myself here, but historically, you're a software company, you're going to sell a license, it's going to be big ticket, then there's some services that you're making some money on. And it's sort of easy to see, okay, I've got to track a bunch of prospects and clients, and so there's a whole process and funnel. And I can afford to spend some money on a sales solution because hopefully there's some big sales there. But if my customers are spending $5 a month or $1 a month, and I've got hopefully 10,000 of them, how does that fit with gotta enter some data? How do you fit in SaaS land as opposed to software license?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. Is that you're basically just saying, like, what's the difference between one more traditional software model and or
How does Salesforce, how is your pricing and your implementation change to fit with that model where I don't want to or can't afford to spend $50,000 up front when my customers are only paying me $1 a month?
right? Yeah. So the pricing model is certainly something that a lot of companies have had to come to grips with. I mean, I think in tech there's generally an understanding, but as we try to penetrate new markets, like in manufacturing is a market where we are very underpenetrated in Canada. Pretty difficult to walk into a manufacturer that's used to capital expenditures and tell them that they've got to put an extra $10,000 or $50,000 on in an operating expense on their books. So it is challenging. It takes a little bit of education. In certain deals we've got flexibility on payment terms and things like that. So we can be flexible, but at the end of the day, for SaaS companies, a lot of what we do in our selling effort is around education, right? Trying to help educate the customer on, hey, what are the benefits? What are you actually getting for the spend?
What would you say? So we've got a bunch of companies here who are a couple $1 million or less revenue, so just starting out. There's a couple that are already customers, but many who are not. Based on what you've seen, what would be your top 3 problem areas if you're looking at a Salesforce type solution? Like, what are your top 3? Don't do this.
Yeah. I think the first one is don't assume that it's going to just solve problems, because it's not a silver bullet. You'd be amazed at how many times companies they'll read something about it. Like we've got a lot of good marketing and a lot of good PR. We've got a solid customer community that advocate for us. And so the most dangerous sales that we go through are the ones where a customer or prospect comes at us and says, oh yeah, I've heard I have no visibility into my pipeline. Everyone's telling me to get Salesforce, I'm getting Salesforce. And that's where we run problems, because you can't just deploy it and expect that all your problems are going to be solved. That's throwing good money after that. So I would say, sit down and take the time to think through. And this is what our account teams can help with at times, if you're open to opening the kimono, is sitting down and figuring out, okay, what are the challenges I'm actually trying to solve, and what are going to be the KPI, the measurements that we're going to track to make sure that this whole thing is successful. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, when we do get engaged with customers, there's usually a laundry list. We'll come into a room like this, we'll whiteboard out all the different processes in a business, and there will be a lot of friction points. There'll be a lot of broken processes, a lot of things that we know we can try to fix. And I think the key is not to bite off more than you can chew. Start with, what I will say is, you want your users to just get little tastes of, see little benefits, and then ask for more. And then you can slowly weave in some of the other challenges you've got, as opposed to just giving them a screen that has 50,000 fields and tell them to fill out all of them. You'll get zero adoption on it. So I'd say ease into it a little bit. When I say ease into it, I wouldn't say just start with one person and expect them to solve your problems. You may need to start with enough so that you build enough groundswell internally to actually make a change, but don't give them so much complexity that it just overwhelms them.
Wouldn't you say Salesforce's success has been predicated actually on just the penetration into like a sales org part of an entire, like it may be 20 people out of a 500 person organization and then virally go up from there?
Yeah.
And has that remained your strategy up to this point, especially in the Canadian market?
Still very much a seed and grow strategy for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what I meant by that comment was, so take a little bit of a larger business to your point. If there's a 30 person sales organization, a 10 or 20 person customer service organization, 5 marketing people, what I would say is maybe don't buy everything, don't put all departments on at once, because then you're implementing a lot of different functionality and you're trying to solve a lot of different problems. And what you end up with is a little bit of a clutter of, your salesperson logs in for the first time and they can't even figure out what's what on that screen. So my point was pick the one department that you think is most broken, but then make sure that you sort of do go end to end within that department, because there's a few reasons for that. Number one, if you do it one at a time, there will be some added cost to retraining everybody, right? Because that one person isn't just going to teach all the others how to use it. So you're sort of getting some economies of scale by getting everybody on within that one group. And two, the collective learning actually accelerates the learning curve and the adoption curve. Because if you've got one person on it just trying to figure out everything and solve all the problems, it'll take them a lot longer and there's a higher risk of failure. Whereas if everybody's kind of collectively working together, you'll see a little bit of a spike in adoption. So that was my point. It's more pick the biggest problem and then make sure everyone's on it within that group. And then once they've adopted it and the other groups are seeing the benefits, you can start to scale up from there.
One of the things I'm curious about is, with the decision that you made probably close to about 7 or 8 years ago to really move away from the services side, one of the biggest challenges is either licensing churn because you've sold someone 50, they're using 30, or customer churn in general. By outsourcing your customer success to partners, how have you actually mitigated the whole churn side? I know churn is tiny within Salesforce, but you've managed to maintain it in a fairly good band. What's your thinking on that? And has that helped or hindered you in terms of watching those kind of numbers?
Yeah, so we've run into the challenges recently, I'd say in the last year or so. For a good portion of the last 10 years or so, it hasn't hindered us too much. We were pretty rigorous on training the partners and making sure they're certified in the products that we've got. We also augmented with our own customer success group. So we do have customer success resources that will step in if and when something goes sideways or if the customers do have challenges. So we don't necessarily outsource the entire post-sales support process. We primarily outsource just that implementation phase where the partner comes in, sits down with the customer, does a bit of a business process review, and then literally goes to the nitty-gritty of I'm going to deploy, I'm going to create this field, I'm going to create this integration, and I'm going to import this box of data. And then once they're done that, they can provide post-sales support, but primarily it comes back to us after that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Dave, in the past, we've spent a little bit of time talking about how you guys think about running your business as a SaaS company.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations that we've had in a prior meeting that I found really, really interesting was the whole idea of how you are comping your sales and how that has shifted over time. Could you share some thoughts on particularly in these sort of at the sub 2 million or sub 5 million revenue mark, their best practices in sales comp structures?
Yeah, for sure. So we the first thing I'd say is that we try to keep our comp plans as simple as possible. And that's often very hard to do, especially when if you start having multiple SKUs because you want to start incenting people to sell more of the different products. But we've always tried to maintain a comp plan that was very simplistic. So it was, the account executives knew exactly what they were tasked with. So there's, with the exception of a few anomalies and a few minor, there's always been sort of 4 key pillars to our comp plans. The first one is just incremental revenue. We call it ACV, ARR, whatever you want to call it. That's a given. I'm sure everybody's the same. The second one is still new logos. So that was probably a little more significant in the early days, where if we signed a new logo, yes, I get commissioned on the revenue, but then there'd be a commission bump just because I brought in a new logo. That still exists because we're still in market penetration mode, but the amount, the number, the commission rate has come down a little bit as we have gained a certain level of penetration. The third one, which I love, is never stop selling. We don't actually call it this in the comp plan, but the logic behind it, or the behavior we're trying to drive, is never stop selling. And I'm sure a lot of you have this built into your comp plans as well, but essentially what it means is that once a rep has hit quota, whether it's the month, the quarter, the year, however you do your comp plans, their commission rates actually go up. So the whole idea is a little bit of this is psychological as well. When a rep is at quota, when they're feeling great about themselves, they tend to sell more. You see sort of a spike in their activity, in the way they deal with customers, and you sort of want your entire sales team selling like they're at quota, whether they're at 0, 50, or 100. So we actually incent them even further to sell more, and you see an escalation out of that. And then the fourth pillar, which also has evolved over the years, currently is on multi-year contracts. So as we've gotten massive, deferred revenue is a huge KPI for Wall Street, and so multi-year contracts has become extremely important for us. And so we incent reps on selling multi-year contracts. So essentially, just to give you a basic example with fake numbers, if you sold a $10 per year contract and the standard commission rate was 10%, you would earn $1 on that incremental revenue. If you sold if that contract was 5 years, you'd have 4 years of multi-year, right? So $10 you get paid on the incremental revenue for year one, and then you would get 4 years of multi-year, and you would earn sort of a fraction of a percent on that $40 of multi-year. So essentially, the way we have it worked out is if a rep sells a 5-year deal, they can pretty much double their commissions. So that we see a pretty healthy spike in multi-year commitments. But that has, like I said, that's been one that has evolved over the years because even when I started, Salesforce wasn't a tiny company. We were just much smaller than we are now. And even back then, we were focused on cash flow. Multi-year wasn't really, it was nice, but the big thing was cash up front. We used to get heavy incentives if it was annual payments versus monthly or quarterly. And that probably changed about 6 years ago now. So it took, we were already a 13, 14-year-old company by the time we made that switch to, hey, now we're putting focus on multi-year. So that was one of the big things. Yeah.
Dave, do you comp on renewals then?
We do, but it's we've got an interesting structure, and I don't know what's right because anytime I speak with companies, everyone's got it a little bit different. We're not hunter-farmer, and so if I'm a rep, the reps on my team are the quarterbacks, and they remain the rep after the sale. So they have a renewal bonus, let's call it, in their comp plan, but it's pretty small, and it's based on their aggregate territory. It's not by account. And so if they hit 85 or 92 or whatever percent renewal, and they get this little bonus. But the reason why it's not a huge component is because it's a little bit self-correcting because they remain the rep after the sale, and because, to your point, we typically seed and then grow. A huge component of a rep's success in any given year is going to be cross-selling and upselling, right? So if I sign you as a customer, I'm not going to operate just to hit that renewal bonus. I'm going to operate so I can make sure you're successful so that I can sell you more, because that's probably going to be 50% of my revenue. So that's how we manage renewals. We do have a renewals team that comes in and helps with the logistics at renewal time, but that's a little bit more of an operation function for us.
These topics you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Most of it, actually. We tend to open up our kimono. I'm actually shocked sometimes at how much we do. We don't share confidential numbers, but we're pretty open.
Slogan?
What's that? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Sorry. Yeah.
What are some of the newer things that you're excited about coming down? A bit about things you're doing in cloud, Internet of Things, or artificial intelligence. Like, as you reach, I don't know if you're anywhere near saturation. As you get all of this on board, what are you going to bring next?
Yeah, so you called out the two that are pretty exciting. Right now, AI, IoT, they're probably more buzzwords than they are reality, at least in our world. But it does get pretty exciting when you think about some of the possibilities of having all your customer data and then being able to bring in some of those types of high volume transactions, right? We have one interesting story with an insurance company in the U.S. that has tied in with weather data networks. So they're kind of using a combination of Internet of Things with AI, and automatically they see that there's going to be a massive